Hello everyone, I am the Man at Kirby. Welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, Taii Wakeen Perfect Shot. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel at no extra cost to you. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more for as little as $1. You can also become a channel member for just 99 cents. Show off your support with a logo next to your name and exclusive emojis. Or you can always just support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Taii is a 2/3 human mercenary for 1 red and 1 white. Whenever you deal non-combat damage to a creature equal to its toughness, you draw a card. This might seem like it could require some math to make work, but if you're pinging 1 toughness creatures with 1 damage, that's the best way to draw cards off of Taii's triggered ability. Best of all, it's not limited to once per turn. Surprising, right? Not only is this ability amazing, but she's also got an awesome activated ability. For X and tapping, non-combat damage you deal to a permanent or player gets boosted by X. So if you pinged an opponent for 1 non-combat damage, you can pay X and tap Taii Wakeen to have that damage be X plus 1 instead. There are so many ways to make the most of both of her abilities, even simultaneously. First, let's see how we'll be dealing non-combat damage to opponents and or their permanents. Abraded Bluffs, Sunscorched Desert, Ramunap Ruins, Shivan Gorge, Keldon Megaliths, Balduvian Trading Posts, and Desert do so without having to dedicate a spell slot in the deck for them. Essentially, the opportunity cost of including these lands in your deck is 0. The first 2 do so when entering the battlefield, but since they're deserts, they can then be used to fuel Ramunap Ruins, since it requires sacrificing a desert to activate. Just make sure you tap them for mana first to help pay for the ability. This does have a hefty price tag to activate, but with enough mana you can finish off the table with it. Shivan Gorge can do something similar for cheaper and without the sacrifice, making it the best one here. At the end of the turn before yours, you can sink all your mana into it plus Taii to increase how much damage it deals. Keldon Megaliths does something similar but only to a single target, and you need to be hellbent to activate it. But that's fine since it can still be used as a land until then. The last 2 only ping attackers, but that's fine since it can be an attack deterrent if all your mana is open. Best of all, Desert can also be sacrificed to Ramunap Ruins. Of these, the Trading Post is best as it can tap you for 2 mana if not used to ping. You do have to sacrifice an untapped mountain when it enters the battlefield, but that's a good enough trade. Spikefield Hazard is technically a land that also deals non-combat damage, since its backside is a land that can tap for mana, albeit entering tapped. I consider it a land slot. Just don't be greedy and play it as a land if you missed your land drop. In any case, for just 1 red mana, you can cast this at instant speed to deal 1 damage to any target, sinking in a bunch into Taii, essentially turning this into an X speed instant damage burn spell for an amazing finisher that doesn't take up a slot in your deck. As for the spell slots dedicated to burn, the deck's running Thermal Alchemist, Lightning Rig Crew, and Lobber Crew. These are amazing and straightforward, tap to deal 1 damage to all opponents. The best timing is at the end of the turn before yours, where you can sink as much mana as you can into Taii to boost their damage output. Brash Taunter and Stuffy Doll can also do the same but to a single opponent. That's fine because they're great on their own since they're the best kind of blockers to have. As a bonus, Brash Taunter can potentially kill off creatures thanks to Taii, and Stuffy Doll will always draw you a card when it hits itself because it has 1 toughness and deals 1 damage to itself. So don't forget that. Caltrops, Fire Ants, Brigid Hero of Kinsbale, Pyrohemia, Kusarigama, and Goblin Chain Whirler are included to deal with opponents' creatures en masse. These are amazing attack deterrents, especially the first 4, since you can activate them on attack or trigger on attack, as is the case with Caltrops. Since Taii boosts the non-combat damage dealt to each permanent and player this turn, you can potentially wipe the board with any of these effects and just paying X. Just be careful with Pyrohemia since it burns you too, and Taii isn't limited to just opponents. You will get hit by her as well. Kusarigama is amazing to prevent the equipped creature getting blocked, especially by multiple creatures. Fire Ants, just like Pyrohemia, deals damage to your creatures as well, so only use it when you absolutely need to wipe the board. Goblin Sharpshooter and Woolshock Sorcerer can ping any target just by tapping. You can maximize their damage thanks to Taii, but they're also amazing at dealing with 1 toughness weenies, especially Goblin Sharpshooter. Keep in mind that Taii's effect lasts until end of turn, so if you really sink a ton of mana into X, Goblin Sharpshooter will deal X plus 1 damage to each target. If you kill a creature that way, it'll untap. If X was greater than any toughness on the board, you just killed off all of your opponent's creatures. Grafted Exoskeleton is included to end games faster this way. If the pinger deals 1 damage to an opponent, equipped with Grafted Skeleton and boosted by Taii means 9 mana is all you need to kill an opponent. If you don't like poison counters, you don't have to run it, but games need to end, especially with a red-white deck that needs all the help it can get. As for non-permanent non-combat damage sources, the deck is running Blazing Volley, Electrickery, End the Festivities, Tectonic Hazard, Boiling Earth, Scouring Sands, Smash to Dust, and Sending Fanged Dragon on an adventure. These can very easily become one-sided board wipes with enough mana. Sure, depending on how strong your opponent's creatures are, you'd have to sink a ton of mana into Taii, but that's just the price to pay for wiping only your opponent's boards. Take that, Cyclonic Rift. Marrow Shards, Rain of Blades, and Scorching Winds only ping attacking creatures, but these are great Rattlesnake spells since opponents aren't going to expect you running these trash spells. However, Taii is the kind of commander that turns garbage cards into treasure, which are my favorite kinds of commanders. Best of all, Marrow Shards can be started with just 2 life, leaving all of your mana available to sink into Taii. These spells also synergize amazingly with Heartflame Duelist. Once this is on the battlefield, your instants and sorceries have lifelink. The amount of life you can gain thanks to it is insane. If that wasn't all, you can also send this on an adventure at instant speed to deal 3 damage to any target for 3 mana. So it's also another non-combat damage source for Taii to make the most of. This creature just does it all in this deck, so don't sleep on it. Just imagine gaining over X life per creature on the board when boosting a spell like End the Festivities. You can then sit back and play the arch enemy with style on your throne of triple-digit life. Other multi-use cards that deal non-combat damage include Acorn Catapult, Court of Embereth, and Aurelia the Law of Buff. Aurelia is another way to deal damage to each opponent with 0 effort on our part. If an opponent wants to swing with a massive board, they might end up dying first due to Aurelia's trigger and enough mana for Taii. If that wasn't enough, she also draws you a card regardless who's attacking with 3 or more creatures. On top of that, she's a 4/4 flyer with Vigilance and Haste for just 5 mana. Amazing. Court of Embereth also provides potential card advantage in the form of making us the Monarch. However, we also create 3/1 Knights during our upkeep. These are great for so many reasons, which we'll soon get to. More importantly, if we're the Monarch when it triggers, we deal X damage to each opponent. Damage that can be boosted with Taii. This enchantment does it all here. Last but not least is Acorn Catapult. Another source of non-combat damage to a single target, it's similar to the other ones previously mentioned. However, as a bonus, it gives the affected player a 1/1 Squirrel token, a token that can then be pinged for us to draw a card. This gift strategy is so important that the deck is running Forbidden Orchard, Genesis Chamber, and Varchild's War Riders. If opponents were to run out of creatures for us to ping to gain advantage from, just gift them some. Each of these give tokens with a toughness of 1, making it incredibly easy to draw tons of cards thanks to effects like Pyrohemia and Fire Ants. We can draw to a ton of cards that way, especially with Varchild's War Riders since the amount of tokens it gives increases thanks to the cumulative upkeep trigger. Generous Gift and Stroke of Midnight also provide gifts while simultaneously being some of the best removal spells in the deck. The deck was going to run them regardless, but they also provide tokens that are more useful to us than opponents. That being said, the deck is still running Tybalt's Trickery and Chaos Warp for single target interaction, Grasp of Fate, Guthrie Wright's History, Olorian's Serene Light, and Unexplained Absence for multiplayer single target interaction, and Final Showdown and Blasphemous Act for the board wipes. While the deck has many ways to wipe the board, since they are dependent on the commander, a global ping spell, and enough mana, these get the job done when necessary. Especially if you want to wipe the board but don't have access to Taii Wakeen. Going back to the importance of tokens, Dwarven Mine, Kirkkeep, Geldoran Outpost, and Mirex are the only cards we control that create some for us, and even then only because they do not take up slots in the deck. We want weenie tokens for the same reason we want to gift opponents weenie tokens. We want to ping them for little effort in order to draw cards with our commander. Keep in mind that she triggers off of the creatures getting dealt exact non-combat damage, regardless if we control the creature or not. If all else fails, the repeatable effect lands grant us chump blockers and or skull clamp fodder. We can't just rely on our commander to draw cards, especially when you still need to jump through hoops to draw those cards. This is why War Room is also included, since it also doesn't take up a slot in the deck. I sure do love me them utility lands. However, even in less than ideal circumstances, our commander can potentially draw us into a ton of cards, which is why Reliquary Tower, Thought Vessel, and Decanter of Endless Water are included for good measure. As a non-green deck, it does welcome the occasional mana rock, so the last 2 cards also function amazingly here, with Soul Ring being the only other mana rock in the deck. But we'll see the rest of the deck's mana acceleration near the end of the video. We can also make the most of Taii's activated ability since it's, well, an activated ability. So equipping her with something like Illusionist's Bracers and or Battle Mage's Bracers goes a long way regardless if we have a lot of mana or not. They essentially double the value of X, providing a ton of advantage. not only in the burn but in invested mana as well. Speaking of, Ruby Medallion and Zerda the Dawnwaker are included to reduce costs. The Medallion is already good on its own, but 1 generic mana we can save when casting a burn spell is 1 generic mana extra we can spend on X. Zerda makes X cheaper but not down to 0. So if we pay just 1 for X, Taii will boost by 3 additional damage thanks to Zerda. Zerda also works with every other activated ability in the deck, from the pinging effects of lands to equipment cost. Speaking of equipment, Sunforger is absolutely busted here. For just 2 mana, you can tutor an instant spell straight to the stack from your library. Ideally, this is great for getting a much needed global burn spell you can then boost with Taii. However, you can also get any other crucial instant such as the previously mentioned interactive spells like Generous Gift, etc. On top of that, you can get protective effects at instant speed too, such as Boros Charm. This is amazing not just against opponents' interaction, but also if you really need to use a global effect. You can first cast Boros Charm to give your board indestructible and then burn it all to the ground. Mistveiled Plains is obviously included since it's Sunforger's best friend. Being able to bottom deck Boros Charm, an interactive instant, or a burn instant is amazing, allowing us to use them each and every time whenever we need to. This land is so crucial here that when cracking any of the deck's fetch lands that can get a Plains, make sure you get Mistveiled Plains when you do. Sunforger will eventually come around. And since Commander players are so against land destruction, it'll survive more often than not until you do. You can also Rattlesnake Dwarven Mind in response to blocks for that pro gamer move. Going back to making the most of our commander's abilities, Drum Bullower is included to untap all of our creatures each untap step. This card does a ton of work here since a lot of our creatures tap to ping. This lets you do so at the beginning of each end step in order to have them at the ready for another turn, especially if you had to activate Taii in an opponent's turn but still have other opponents' turns to worry about. Ohed Ashnodil Deepest Might and Toralf God of Fury provide a form of redundancy for the commander. Ohed boosts the non-combat damage dealt to opponents, and Toralf deals excess damage to any other target. Unfortunately, you will not draw a card if you control Taii and Toralf while dealing excess damage to a creature, so keep that in mind. As a bonus, you could also cast Toralf for its backside. It costs quite a bit of mana to get everything going for it, but it is a repeatable source of 3 damage that you can make the most of. Better yet, since it returns to your hand, you can then choose to recast it as the Hammer of or Toralf again. That being said, I've only ever cast this as Toralf because he's just too good, especially for a pinger deck like this one. Speaking of equipment, obviously Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, Champion's Helm, Darksteel Plate, Mithril Coat, and Shield of Cauldron are included because of how dependent the deck is on our commander. Fortunately, Taii Wakeen only costs 2 mana to cast the first time, so you could realistically recast her multiple times in a game. However, we don't want to waste so much mana getting her back. At the end of the day, it's better to prevent the problem than to solve it. Last but not least, the best way to help maximize Taii's ability is via Braid of Fire. Once this gets a ton of counters, it adds a ton of red mana to our mana pool. You can then sink it all into Taii during our upkeep, and then each non-combat damage source we control will deal that much damage plus anything else we decided to sink into X, plus the base damage of whatever it was we were dealing. So good. We can also use it to help cast instants too, so it's not just here for our commander. The deck still has other mana acceleration effects like Wayfarer's Bauble, Navigation Orb, and Burnished Heart. Red-white decks can be choosers, but at least artifacts are way weaker to removal than lands are, especially basic lands, so we manage however we can. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running Alpine Meadow, Elegant Parlor, Sacred Foundry, Sacred Peaks, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 3 of each basic land for the basic land wrap effects. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Taii Wakeen Perfect Shot. I'm so happy she's another red-white commander not centered around combat and or equipment. Sure, there are a handful of red-white commanders centered around burn, but what I love about Taii is that she turns trash into treasure, converting burn spells no one uses in commander into X-spell one-sided board wipes. And she has built-in card advantage too, which is even rarer for red-white commanders. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. I also want to thank any channel members. Your membership is greatly appreciated. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Bandit Kirby, and happy brewing.